Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with David Larkins the other day and we spoke about the Green Knight. David is an Arthurian scholar, and he's also the line editor for Pendragon, the tabletop role-playing game set within the world of King Arthur. We talked about the Green Knights, about how it relates to the original poem, and about how it relates to the Pendragon role-playing game. I'm going to jump across to that interview in just a moment, but first, remember to subscribe to the Chaosium YouTube channel. It helps us out and it lets us create more content like this. Thank you.
Okay, so The Green Knight, the movie, is based on a 14th century poem called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It's written in what's called alliterative verse, so the emphasis isn't so much on making the lines rhyme with each other, although there is some of that, but there's also internal sort of sound rhymes, where you have like alliteration going through each line. So it's actually a format of poetry I really like, and one of my favorite ways to engage with that poem is to listen to readings of it, because that's really how, well, I think how it was originally intended anyway, was for oral recitation. It's part of the Arthurian canon. There were a lot of storytellers working within that sphere with these stock characters, kind of like how nowadays you have the Marvel Cinematic Universe or what have you. You have these sort of stock characters that everyone's familiar with. And so this version, or this take on it, presents the Knight of the Round Table, Sir Gawain, as the main character, obviously, as the title would indicate. And it just tells a very simple story, really, of a strange knight who is all green skinned, armor and all, who shows up at Christmas court at Camelot one year and proposes a little game. And in the game, basically, he says that he will receive one blow, and then in a year and a day, he will return the blow in kind. And although this is originally directed at King Arthur, Sir Gawain steps forward and says, I will take this game. And he cuts the knight's head off. And the knight picks up his own head and says, "Great, see you in a year," and he rides off. And so now Gawain realizes, he's going to return the same blow to me. That means he's going to cut my head off. And that's the central conflict of the story. It's a great little self-contained story. It actually is adapted in the Great Pendragon campaign, so Pendragon players can have it feature in their own games. But it's also just a great meditation on chivalry and honor, and what it means to see through with the obligations and commitments that come with being a knight.
Who is Sir Gawain? If we need to know about the character, in the Marvel universe of the Arthurian legend, so to speak, what's the background to this knight?
So Sir Gawain's one of the oldest members of the Arthurian canon. He was one of the original, companions of the Welsh version of King Arthur, and he's remained an important part of the story cycle ever since. Although he was somewhat shunted aside when Sir Lancelot was introduced by French storytellers who wanted their own, OC original character in the stories, and which, personally for me, Gawain's one of my favorites. He's got a lot of very interesting personality conflicts, internal conflicts. Like, he's sort of known as a ladies' man, but at the same time, he upholds that part of chivalry, in particular of protecting ladies and the more vulnerable members of society, the non-martial members of society. So he's a very chivalrous knight. He tries his best to be honorable, and in fact, in the poem and in the movie adaptation, that's kind of the central conflict, is like how he's balancing his own sense of self-preservation against this sort of bind that he finds himself in.
I have a couple more questions about the Arthurian lore, but let's jump across to the movie for just a second. What did you think of it? What were your impressions? What were your thoughts?
I really liked it. For one thing, just the visual aesthetic. This is going to be one of one of those movies I recommend to folks who want a good sort of visual reference point for, Pendragon games in general, especially games that are set later in the timeline, like around the run up to the Grail Quest and then during the Grail Quest. So when you have like the wasteland spreading and Arthur is sickening because the land and the king are one. you know the visual aesthetic is just fantastic, and there are sequences in this movie that could just be straight out of a Pendragon game. There's an encounter with a ghostly lady in a manor who needs her head back, and this wonderful sequence on a battlefield where Gawain encounters a rather suspect character, and then these just feel like sequences out of some of the games I run, honestly. So I really liked it in that way. It is interesting. Hollywood likes a good dramatic arc, so they had to they decided to present Gawain as a kind of a neophyte knight rather than in the poem where he's already established as a very important knight. To borrow Robin Law's terminology, he's more of an iconic hero in the poem where it's like, I am Gawain and this is what I do. And then in the movie he's more of a dramatic character where it's like, I don't know if I even want to be a knight. Oh, what do I do? And then he kind of goes on this journey. But one could quibble about whether that's true to the character or not. I've read points of view from other folks arguing for and against that. But also that makes it a good movie for folks who are new to the game, because it's kind of like you get to go on this journey with Gawain as he learns what it is to be a knight. And so, prospective players of Pendragon get a lot out of watching the movie just in terms of that. There's even internal commentary in the movie where people are kind of like, why would you ask me like what you stand to gain from this? You're a knight. You're just supposed to do this,
Some of the online conversation has been about Dev Patel's performance in the series, and what did you think of Dev's performance?
Oh, absolutely one of the strongest parts of the movie. He brings this amazing vulnerability and humanity to the character. Yeah, it's fantastic. The casting in that movie is great. Just across the board. Just as a brief sidebar, like the performance of King Arthur, and I'm blanking on the actor's name at the moment, but that version of King Arthur is now my favorite sort of older Arthur. Not to take away from Nigel Terry and Excalibur doing the during the earlier sort of Boy King parts of that movie, but the older Arthur in this movie is just, he's great because he's got humanity and a certain sadness about him, and Dev Patel, he just absolutely delivers in his role as well. So really easy on the eyes too.
I will ask you a bit of a cheeky question here, and this has to be framed in the context that I know you enjoyed it. What didn't you like so much? What parts of the film didn't quite land for you? Was it that the Arthurian canon was changed slightly, or overall was it pretty enjoyable?
It was overall enjoyable. I've watched it twice now. I've been able to see it twice, and it's one of those movies I think you get more out of the more you watch it. There's a lot of depth to it. So just on a technical part, there's a lot of really dark scenes. There's a lot of scenes that happen at night or inside interior shots, and the first time I saw it, I don't think the projectionist really accounted for that very well. So there were whole chunks of the movie that were literally just pitch black on the screen, and I was like, is this an intentional choice? That's really bold, but then when I watched it at home on my TV, it was like, actually, like, oh, okay, there's people on the screen. But yeah, I mean, that gets back to what I was saying in terms of the visual aesthetics. I mean, it's a very bold movie visually. The costuming is very interesting. It's sort of divorced from any connection to like actual like trying to say like, oh, this is, happening in the 14th century or whatever, like the costuming also serves a purpose in storytelling itself. But yeah, in terms of what I would docket points for, I think mostly like, yeah, because I do like the character of Sir Gawain so much, it was a little annoying to, see him turned into this kind of, less than honorable character who, is kind of racked with self-doubt. It's like that's part of the story, but you might have cranked that up a little bit too much, I think, so if I had to quibble, that would be it.
So let's talk about the Green Knights themselves for a second. I am passingly familiar with Arthurian legend, and I know a bit about Pendragon. I know about the status of non-human kind of other entities. Is it ever clear exactly what the history, the details of the Green Knight are? Is that ever fully explained either in the original poem or in the film?
Well, in the original poem, it's a part of a magical working by Morgan Le Fay, who's trying to trap Arthur. She's trying to get him to get trapped into this Christmas game, and Gawain actually kind of stymies that by stepping forward on Arthur's behalf. That is in the movie as well. It's not as obvious, I think. There's sorcery afoot, and one thing that's really interesting about the movie is that almost none of the characters are actually named, even in the credits. So like, you can talk about King Arthur in the movie, but it actually in the credits just says the king, very archetypal, which is interesting. So there's this sorceress character who is Gawain's mother, who's kind of like this, hybrid, because in canon, he's the son of Morgause, who's the half sister of Arthur, who is sometimes depicted as being a bit of a sorceress, but not on the same level as Morgan. So she's kind of in the movie, kind of fulfills both those roles, Morgan and Morgause. The Green Knight himself, yeah, it's not explicitly spelled out in the movie, other than he's obviously some kind of being who was sort of summoned to do this task, but he's also living in the Green Chapel. So the interesting thing about that, and again, like from the perspective of a Pendragon GM or player, is that that's actually how the game approaches things like magic or fairies or whatnot. Is like, it's not really your job to figure out what's going on. This is not an investigative role-playing game for the most part, and things just happen and they're mysterious, and you kind of deal with it as best you can, and you try and figure out what the rules are, so you don't accidentally violate any rules, or maybe you can get out of a sticky situation by insisting on a technicality or something. But in terms of like exactly what the Green Knight is, in the movie in particular, he's somewhat divorced from the rest of the story, which is interesting. That's another slight change they made.
Well, let's use that as a bridge to start talking about Pendragon the game. Can you tell us about the Green Knight scenario in the Grand Pendragon campaign?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's actually an interesting example of how that book is written, because it's mostly just a reference. It's like, oh, this is the year that happens. So if you happen to be at Camelot, you're going to see this Green Knight show up. You're going to be one of the knights kind of in the background while Gawain's going through his story. However, pretty much everything in the Great Pendragon campaign is left open for the game master to develop into a scenario of their own. So like, if the game master had seen the movie or was familiar with the poem and thought, hey, this would be a fun little side thing, especially if maybe they had a week where just one player was available for the session, it's like, maybe you're my Gawain, and let's run you through this. Or it could even be a group adventure, rather than a solo kind of situation, right? So the Great Pendragon campaign presents these sort of canon events, and it's really up to the GM to decide, am I going to put a spotlight on this? And if so, to what extent?
Do you think the story of the Green Knight encapsulates a classic Pendragon adventure or a classic Pendragon story, or is it more of a focus on one of the aspects of the game rather than the central arc?
Oh, I think it's very archetypal for the game. I honestly, like I say, I mean, there are sequences that they created in the movie that are not in the poem that feel like they're straight out of a Pendragon, session. And the crux of both works really is about one of the central conflicts in the game, which is sort of oppositional conflict, internally. So, honor versus self-preservation. Your the question of so in both works, there's this magic belt that Gawain is given that will protect him from harm, and he has to decide, like, oh, this is my way out. This is how this is that technicality, right? So I can wear this belt, and the Green Knight will try to chop my head off, and I'll be okay. But then, and he does show up with the belt on. But then it's like, what does that mean? Are you cheating? Are you undermining your own sense of honor? And the answer, of course, is yes. and in fact, the poem ends on a down note where Gawain is ashamed of himself for wearing the belt, and he goes back to Camelot and he confesses to his fellow Round Table knights. He said, I tried to cheat. I did. And all the other knights are like, yeah, but you went on the adventure anyway, and that's what really matters. So we're all going to wear green belts too, as a sign of solidarity with you from this point out. And that's very much something that the one of the fun things, honestly, about playing Pendragon is that failing can often be as fun as succeeding, and sometimes even more fun, because you get to explore the fallout, from the fact that you weren't up for the task. So now what are you going to do?
If there's somebody who watched The Green Knight and goes, that, I want a role-playing game of that, I want to jump into that adventure, how would you recommend that they jump into Pendragon? Is there a scenario they should start off with? Is there a way that they should jump in? What's their portal into the world?
I would suggest that somebody who liked The Green Knight should check out the scenario The Gray Knight, which obviously is a little bit of an homage, right? And that's a classic scenario. It was written by Larry DiTilio, who also wrote the original Masks of Nyarlathotep for Call of Cthulhu. And that is an epic adventure. It is written for group play, so you got no problems there. And it's very much a quest-based thing with a magical knight who seems indefeatable. And that's the central crux of the problem, is how do we defeat this knight and save the king's life? And you got to go on this quest, and you got to go through all these sort of magical adventures along the way. It's a pretty epic adventure. I always enjoy running that one. So yeah, folks who want that kind of experience in a single scenario, I would recommend the Grey Knight. Folks who want to emulate the tone and the feel of the movie itself, I would say, start up a campaign, grab the Great Pendragon campaign, and just start it around 545 in the chronology, which is sort of the tournament period era, which then goes into the Grail quest. You could run a nice little 15 or 20 year campaign that's going to have all of that kind of feel about it. That there's all these sequences in the movie where it's like almost psychedelic. Like there's just weird stuff happening constantly. There's talking foxes, weird androgynous giants, ruined villages, and battlefields strewn with corpses. And this is all like straight out of that era where the kingdom's just kind of falling apart in front of your eyes. And the only solution is to find the Holy Grail.